2 o'clock, which is like peak 7 a.m. trading outlook in New York. There I'm sitting on a beach in Cannes in my shorts. And his first 3 questions were like, with that company in crisis, what's it like? And I'm sitting there in my shorts. Make sure you have a successor. If you have a successor, you can get promoted. People send you an email and you take 24, 48, 72 hours to respond. Their conclusion is you don't actually really care about what it is that they're saying.
When you get a petition from 20% of your workforce saying you're wrong, do you sit there and go, oh my God, have a dark night of the soul, I need to reverse the decision? Or do you sort of go, no, I made it for the right decisions and I'm going to stick with it?
Hi, I'm Hayaatun.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome to What We Don't Know, all about better leadership in a chaotic world.
So how do you go from being a peer to being a boss? It's a real common question that we get. How do you follow somebody who's been a huge personality when you're maybe a quieter one? And what's it like to run an incredibly large international organization at a time of such disruption? That's what we're going to get into with our guest.
So, Mark Reed, who recently stepped down as CEO of WPP, one of the world's largest advertising agencies. He's a trustee of the Natural History Museum. He's the newly appointed chair at Kantar Media. British-born, Cambridge economics degree. First job was at WPP as a graduate, I think doing corporate development like 35 years ago. Did consulting, founded a startup, and then returned to WPP before eventually taking over from the founder, Sir Martin Sorrell, and becoming the CEO of the group. So, coming up today, we have why it's important to put a Fitbit on a chicken.
What can you learn from Elon Musk and how do you prepare to interview him?
Why wearing shorts to an interview can be a career limiting experience.
How is it that working in a corporate centre is just like being a pigeon?
What it feels like when 20% of your staff think you're wrong.
And you decide you're right. What to wear as a global CEO? And the answer is that beachwear is not always the right answer. A top tip on getting promoted, having somebody ready to step into your shoes.
And also banking the experience you're going to need early in your career.
Sometimes things we learn at school turn out to be useful 30 years later.
Being 58 is still just the start of the next chapter of your career.
Let's meet Mark Reed.
He's going to have some tales to tell.
So Mark, welcome. It's great to see you. Can we start by just give us a sketch of the scale and scope of being the CEO of a big public company? Like, what are the responsibilities and how is the job?
Well, thanks, Matt, and it's great to be here. Look, I think that take WPP. It's a big company. We have 100,000 people around the world to work with big clients like Google, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Ford. So it's a big company. We had 12,000 people in India, 7,000 people in China, so massive global operations. And I guess job of CEO is to make that whole thing work and be successful, ultimately drive, returns to shareholders. So there's the financial element of the job, you're delivering the numbers.
Yeah. And you're responsible to the board as well. So you don't have a single boss in a way. You have a kind of board you report to.
Like a CEO, you sort of don't have a boss, but then you do have a boss.
Everyone's your boss,
to some extent. You are the boss if anyone's a boss today. But I think you've got a lot of constituencies to manage. You've got a board to manage. You have shareholders to manage. You have clients to manage. An executive committee to manage. People to manage. Almost too many things to manage. So how you spend your time across all of those different constituencies is a sort of important element.
Yeah, and it was very complicated business that you kind of stepped into, and we'll talk a bit about that.
Yeah.
Lots of different brands and companies within the sort of empire, and also at a time of incredible change with technology really in sort of vertical takeoff. And you had quite a lot to contend with in that role. So you're also trying to set out, I guess, a vision and a plan.
Yeah, I think your job as CEO is really to say, what is the vision for the company? How are we going to get there? And inspire and communicate and take people on that journey with you. I think the difference between a public company CEO and the CEO of any other business, and nothing can quite prepare you for it, is that suddenly you are sort of on your own and you find you're like the chief salesperson for the company. I remember, when I took over as sort of co-COO to start with, I had to go and see shareholders for the first 2 weeks. All of a sudden, these shareholders asking you, what's the plan? What are you going to do? And you're like, well, I haven't got a plan yet.
I'm on day 2.
I'm on day 2. But you have to decide, how open you are with them, what you say to them, and you are the chief. You are actually the chief salesperson for the company, not just to clients and people to pay them, but to shareholders, to continue to own stock in the company as well.
So Mark, we're really looking forward to spending a bit more time hearing about the realities of being the CEO of WPP. But before we get to that, I just want to take us back a little bit in time and also to maybe get more of a feel for you as a person. So this show, as you know, is called What We Don't Know. So what don't we know about you, Mark, that's relevant to the leader that we now know you as? Give us a nugget or two that helps us understand the person behind the persona.
I'm a sort of introverted Brit, so if there's anything you don't know about me, there's good reason why. There's good reason why you don't know it.
You can relax with us. It's
just today's different.
I tell you my career. I studied economics at university. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left, so I deferred that decision by going to America for a year and spent a year in America there. And I came back, and when I left university, the high-flying careers were like Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, investment banking and consulting, and we didn't have all of the exciting startup energy that we have today, I think, which is really exciting. I didn't kind of want to do that, so I ended up writing to lots of CEOs. I wrote to Martin Sorrell, and I ended up getting a job in the corporate development department of WPP, where I spent my first 3 years, and I learned, I think, an enormous amount in those 3 years from the people around me, looking at M&A transactions. We had a slight financial crisis at the time, so I ended up being in charge of investor relations for WPP at, I think, the age of like 24.
Wow.
Because there was really no one else to do the job. And it was sort of hands-on practical immersion in a business and how a business operates like that.
Do you recall along that journey, even before that, was there a moment at which you first started to think of yourself as a leader or someone who could become a leader?
No, I don't think I really have thought that. Maybe a terrible mistake, that strategically about my career. I've tended to confront situations as they come up. Probably why, although I left WPP, I was with the same company for 35 years. I left in the middle of 7 or 8 years. But I think I've tended to look at things, opportunities they come up, rather than think mistakenly, strategically as good about what you should do or shouldn't do, really.
When you were very young, take us back to adolescent Mark. Do you think that other people would have spotted signs of the success that lay ahead?
Probably not. My economics teacher told me I'd be very lucky to get, into university, which I managed to do. So I don't think so. Look, I did well academically at school. I was very interested in economics and business. My father was an entrepreneur. So I think probably I was heading in that direction. I'm definitely not the same person I was when I was 15. I don't think anybody is.
But there must have been something, Mark, that kind of, when everybody was applying for Goldman Sachs and the consulting jobs, that was different about you. You kind of wrote entrepreneurially, I guess, to a bunch of CEOs. You then find yourself in front of Martin Sorrell, and it's early in the days of WPP. There's no investor relations department. So there's something about that appealed to you, isn't there?
Well, I think I'm quite I wouldn't say revolutionary. I'm quite sort of counter the establishment. I don't like kind of that sort of established thing. So I wanted to probably I'm drawn to do things that are a little bit different, which is why I ended up in a creative business. I think about it, I actually wanted to be an architect, bizarrely, at university, which, having studied economics and then 7 years architect, I was clearly never going to be. So I think that I sort of don't like the sort of rules and establishment and being, as I found out from my daughter, told what to do.
And so what is it, if you flip it, that you think others saw in you that made them have confidence in you to give you significant responsibility at that stage?
I think that you learn that you just have to deliver reliably to people. And there were times, I can remember doing some spreadsheet which was completely wrong, which caused like complete chaos. I certainly learned from that experience. I think you have to deliver reliably to people in an organization and take responsibility and take initiative. And if someone needs to tell you to take initiative, then by definition it's not initiative. And I think having some confidence and just looking at opportunities ahead of you, and there always are, making of them what you can.
What was the sense of self-belief you had that meant that you were willing to just take those opportunities without anybody asking you to?
Well, I think I had a sense of self-belief, but probably actually it's almost the reverse. It's almost like a lot of people are driven by as much insecurity as self-confidence.
Interesting.
So I just think that's what I did really. So I can't like.
You think
dig
about
too
in those
deep.
early years, it sounds quite exciting. You're building this company, you're kind of dealing with crises, you're building spreadsheets. Sometimes they work. Can you think of a moment or two where you really felt I learned something from those mistakes or those pressure points that you sort of look back on and go, actually, that's something that shaped me as a leader I am today?
So I was at WPP, I guess, for 4 years. And then I went to business school, and I realized kind of I'd done most of the business school curriculum at WPP.
Right, excellent.
Sort of like interesting
Without the
thought.
textbook.
Yeah.
I'd done the like, financial accounting. I'd done the corporate finance course. Actually, I'd done economics. I'd done the micro and macroeconomics course. I hadn't done actually much about marketing, and I hadn't done lots of the softer things that you realize are more important later on. We had a course called political economy, which is all about sort of countries and capital allocation. And at the time, we all thought it was a complete waste of time. And then when you become CEO of a company, actually it's very important, where you invest and how you invest over 10 years. Actually, do you invest in China or not China is a pretty critical decision, as you would know from Google and other things. So I think that you learn things that become important, and you learn things that you don't realize are important that you later realize are important.
You're sort of banking the modules that you would have had to study in business school in the real world. What about people? Were there people who you felt inspired by, or that you specifically learned from, that were important to you in some way?
That time at WPP, obviously I learned a lot from Martin, probably good and bad. There was a guy or gentleman called Jeremy Bullmore who ran J. Walter Thompson for many years. And Jeremy at the time was probably in his 70s, would come into the office 4 days a week. I have quite a low boredom threshold. I can't concentrate for more than about 20 minutes. And so when I was sort of fed up with doing the spreadsheet or bored of it, and there were only just spreadsheets in those days, I go and chat to Jeremy for an hour, who would impart his wisdom about advertising agencies and businesses and how to win new business and what really happened. And I think I probably learned an enormous amount from Jeremy, actually by osmosis, about how our business worked and sort of what makes people tick. So I had that sort of creative side from him. And then there was a couple of people, Rupert Day and Mark Rosen, in our corporate development department, who would sort of give me term sheets to do and deal sheets to do. And I learned a lot from them about like the basics of corporate finance and how to buy companies and how to talk to people. And, so I think it was actually, I was just lucky in a way, and lots of things are luck in life, to have that kind of very formative experience.
So we'll probably come back to the relationship with Martin Sorrell, because I think that will be definitely something we want to explore further. But when you look at these people in terms of your development as a leader or as somebody becoming more senior in the business, were there any people who were influential, or any particular insights that you gained about how to lead well from this constellation of people that were around you?
Funnily enough, I don't think at that time. I think that's something I learned later. And, talk about my career. If I look back at my career, I probably left it later than I should to really step into a CEO job. I think I was lucky in the sense I worked in the head office of a big global company, and there's lots of things that are attractive about that. You have visibility, you're in senior meetings, but the reality is you're not actually in charge of anything.
It's what people call like a corporate job, isn't it? Sitting in the corporate centre. Yeah. Sort of resented quite often by people out in the front line.
Yes. They're like pigeons, they fly in and shit on you. It's like,
that was your job.
People were called.
Yeah.
And so I think making that job successful is important. Like, I think I was relatively well liked by the people in the company for helping them be successful rather than telling them what to do, which was important later. I think also what you do realize is actually it's the people who are really running the business, really talking to clients, who create value in the company. And over the years, I've had many people work for me in chief of staff, strategy type roles. And the advice I always give them, and it's always hard for them, is what point do you make that migration into like a line role or really running a business? And I think that if you don't do that, then you will never really progress to, a senior position in business.
So how do you know when it's the right time?
I left it too late in many respects. I mean, I didn't really run I ran a group called WPP Digital within WPP, but I wasn't really the CEO of it. I was really kind of,
it's a federation,
adding up the numbers. And so while you had to manage people and give them feedback and change people, you weren't ultimately really running it. It was really when I went to run Wonderman, which would have been sort of 2014, 13, 14. so that I really took on the responsibility for really running a business. And, at that time, 10,000 people who are like, looking to you for leadership.
So why do you think that you left it too late? I mean, as in, what makes you say it was too late?
Well, it wasn't too late. It's like I actually quite enjoyed it, and then having enjoyed it, so I wish I'd tried it earlier.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I wouldn't say it was too late, but I think that if I have had a thought, it's like maybe I have been too cautious in making big decisions and moves like that, and I've been lucky in a sense to be able to navigate my way through one company. And I think there's a virtue in working for one company, one industry, because you know how it works, you have a reputation, people, all of those things help. But there are CEOs who stay in one company for a long time or one industry. There are many fewer CEOs who do 3 different CEO jobs in 3 different industries. I had breakfast with one actually this morning, but there aren't that many that do that. And it's quite interesting where being almost their job is to be being a CEO, not leading a company about which they're passionate or interested or.
And can we go, Mark, to that moment where you went from being one of the pigeons flying over the operating companies and dropping on them to being one of the people outrunning a company? What was that transition like? Because then we'll come on to what the transition was like from running one company to running the public company. So how did it feel when you were announced?
Yeah, I went, it was interesting because I was at WPP and I was sort of reluctant to give up some of the WPP bits and become like 100% Wonderman. But then you go and see the people there and you realize, it matters to them and how you do drive the success of the business. And actually you have to make the business successful. All of a sudden you ditch very quickly all the things that you thought were important before, because the only thing that matters is how that business does.
Wow.
Wonderman was a great agency and it had lost its way a little bit. It had a long-term CEO, Danielle, who'd done a great job, but maybe, the last couple of years have been a bit more difficult. And, he was very helpful to me. And I think that, I went in and I was able in a quite clear-eyed fashion to understand, well, what the bits that were working, what the bits that weren't working. And, in a kind of almost systematic way, like I had a to-do list of things that I wanted to change and things that needed to change, and tried to go about that as quickly as possible.
So when you look at the way you approached that first CEO role at Wonderman and the way you approached the CEO role at WPP, in what ways was your leadership style the same, and in what ways do you think it would have been different?
Well, I do think I learned an enormous amount from that transition going into Wonderman to going into WPP, because they were actually almost quite similar situations. And so, WPP needed a vision, in my view, at that time. It needed a clearer strategy. It was too complicated. It needed to be simplified. Martin and I could debate how many direct reports he had, but there were
quite a lot,
and certainly a lot more people than he maybe realized at the time. We had an issue with Ford, our largest client. Our business was up for review globally. So there were, quite a number of sort of pressing issues. At the same time, your job as CEO is to take the organization through that confidently. So you can, I remember part of my job was like, however I felt, I had to be positive and convey absolute conviction that this was the strategy and it was absolutely going to work, and there was no room for it to fail, because why would it? And I had completely convinced I knew exactly what to do, even though maybe I didn't. So I think you have to go in and convey that confidence to people.
Did that come naturally?
Well, I'm probably more on the introverted side. So I don't, you stick me in a town hall, I'm probably not going to do, as good a job as somebody else. But I think also you just realize to come across as you are. You can't be someone who you're not. And so I think everybody's style works for them. You see, I've seen CEOs over the years talk, and some are great, some are brilliant, and there's no correlation between how good they are at talking and how good they are as CEOs. You realize that quite quickly. I think that conveying that sense of sort of personal conviction that things are going to be all right, and if people go on this journey with you, actually we're going to get to the right answer, I think is the most important thing.
And tell us about the moment then that you found out that you were going to be the CEO of WPP. Talk us through that process.
Well, I sort of had this sort of strange 6-month period where I was co-CEO COO, I think. So Roberto called our chairman became executive chairman, and Andrew Scott and I were like co-COOs. And Andrew, I think, came, he was very good, came to an understanding of how we're going to run the business over the 6 months. I focused on clients and people and the external side. He focused more on the finances and the balance sheet. I went through this process of sort of interviewing for the job, doing board presentations. I mean, it dragged on from my side much too long, but in a funny way, it was quite helpful because it meant that when I was finally appointed 1st of September, like I had a plan, I knew what I wanted to do. So I think there's a real sense of, you're appointed, here's the plan, what are we going to do, and momentum. So I think that was a good thing. At the same time, we had some bad news on clients, but I think generally there was a feeling of sort of positivity and momentum into the organization. Luckily, I was lucky people wanted me to succeed. One guy, I remember Ray created a t-shirt called "We Are Mark Ready," which is like at some event, which is slightly embarrassing.
Great to have marketing geniuses working for you like that.
Nice marketing.
This is a question that I sourced in doing my digital research for today. And I saw someone ask Steve Babayiko, the Nigerian advertising executive, if you could ask one question of anybody in the world of advertising marketing, what would it be? And he thought really hard. And then he said, I would like to ask Mark Reed how scared he was when he became the CEO of WPP. So this one's for you, Steve.
Well, I was quite scared. At that time, you're sort of more scared not to get it than you are to get it. It's like, I don't know whether I wanted it. I mean, Roberto said to me, you've got to really make sure you want it. And of course, you never really think that through. Once you're in the process, you're in the process. So I was probably not as scared as I should have been.
I think Steve is particularly thinking of the context of just general global turmoil and the transformation job that needed to be done. So I think he meant in terms of the scale of what was then going to be, sitting in your intro.
Yeah, I think we knew the transformation job, some of the transformation job, but I think the global turmoil came later and the scale of the transformation came later. I mean, you think about what happened over 7 years, we had COVID, Ukraine, George Floyd, inflation,
energy, tariffs,
climate change, tariffs. And then we had the AI revolution, which will change, WPP's business. I will change every business and I absolutely convinced every white collar business fundamentally.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue for you, Matt. There you go.
Well, it was a great question from Steve, so thank you. From the outside, on the CEO transition, lots of people ask us about, how you go from being a peer to the boss.
Yeah.
And from the outside, and I knew Martin pretty well as well, you're very different personalities. You might argue Martin was the founder CEO and he created through acquisition this, used to have in the corporate head office a big sort of chili pepper with about 1,000 logos of all the businesses. Wasn't quite 1,000, was it? But all the businesses that had been bought. And the joke was, they all reported individually to Martin. So it was built around very much his sort of personality and fairly unique kind of approach to working. And then you come along and, we can see what kind of, you say you're an introvert, you're a rather quiet Brit, you're not the kind of front-footed sales sort of person. So you had a transition to make in terms of stepping in following the founder, have a transition because your personality is really very different and the profile you have is quite different. So how did you go about winning the trust of the team and thinking about what you needed to do in terms of contrast or continuity?
Well, I think firstly, I realized I could never do the job the same way, which is fine and probably a good thing. You have to do the job the way you want to do the job. I think secondly, people wanted me to succeed. And I think that was actually the most important thing. When I say people, I mean both people inside the business for obvious reasons, but most importantly, clients.
Yeah.
Your colleague Philip was very helpful in that respect. So I think people wanted the business, wanted WPP to succeed, and they wanted me to succeed in that role. And I think that was the most important context. And I think you just have to do things the way you want to do them and the way you can do them. I wasn't ever expecting to become CEO of WPP. I was lying on a beach and the chairman called and said, you better come back to London. It was never in my sort of plan. In that sense, I wasn't necessarily, I was both very well prepared and very unprepared. I think it's hard today because most companies are set up now in this sort of matrix with shared services. Very few people in a company see, legal issues, investor relations, all the breadth of things, because you've got shared HR services, shared legal. And so even if you run a big division of a company, you may just be responsible for sales or product. So actually I was lucky having been in the center to have that enterprise level.
You'd had a sort of apprenticeship because you'd seen all that and you'd been out running one of the opcos. So you knew both ends of the pigeon flight. And
very few companies, and including sadly WPP, it's just hard to create large numbers of people with that view. We all run in a very lean way. So let's go and take this divisional superstar and give him like a non-job at head office to learn how head office works. No one really wants that either. So I do think that, you do realize that succession is the most important thing inside an organization. And even the most important thing as an individual. We say to people, make sure you have a successor. If you have a successor, you can get promoted. If you don't have a successor, everyone says, I'd like to promote Matt, but there's no one to take over from him. It's never going to happen. Whereas you go, I can promote this person, Matt's going to get a new job. So don't be insecure about your succession. You view it positively. In a way, I was both well prepared. Nothing can prepare you for taking on this job when you never know what's going to happen.
And a couple of words you've used in describing it, you sort of said a bit, it's quite a lonely job because suddenly, everything's on you and all of those shareholder, board, staff, customer relationships are on you. Were there some sort of rituals or ways of working that we wouldn't know, but that helped you to cope with that? You said, needing to project confidence when you didn't always have it, managing that complicated global business. How did you sort of cope?
I mean, this is terrible. I tend to stay on top of my inbox,
right?
And just use my inbox to make sure I was dealing with the things that came through the door. I would try as much as I could to talk to and spend time with people inside the business and clients. And that's hard because there's just so many people. Actually, one of the joys of COVID was suddenly realizing I could communicate with thousands of people using video. We went from sending emails to doing, video-based town halls and things done very quickly, and I do them at home. And that actually helped a lot. Trying to, talk to people in the lift, reply to people quickly. I think getting back to people quickly is a very important discipline. If people send you an email and you take 24, 48, 72 hours to respond, their conclusion is you don't actually really care about what it is that they're saying.
That must be tough though, because you had, thousands of clients who might want to get in touch with you, 100,000 employees who might get in touch with you. You could have spent the whole time doing email.
I did spend most of my life doing emails, basically. Okay. I remember sitting in conferences, answering emails, running like, am I actually doing my email or listening to the person speaking? So I tended to do my emails while watching television at night. I'm quite good at doing two things at the same time. I've realized probably I'm better at doing two things at the same time than I am doing one thing at the same time. So watching TV and doing emails is okay till I asked my wife what was going on in the program. She'd tell me off for not paying attention. I do think that's a good discipline, but electronic communication can't replace in-person communication. And the challenge in any job is balancing, that famous matrix, the important and the urgent. You spend all your time on the email, you deal with the urgent, you don't deal with the important as well. So you have to be able to abstract yourself enough, understand, what's important.
I just was kind of slight tangential, but I'm interested in the fact that we have so many of the sort of visible CEOs appear to be extroverts. What do you think are the advantages of being an introvert as a CEO?
I mean, I'm not that totally introverted. I mean, I do like public stages. I'm quite happy to talk to people.
And were you always happy on a public stage, or did that come over time?
Oh no, that definitely came with experience.
Just learning by doing.
But classically, an introvert sort of gets their energy or reboots energy by solo time, and an extrovert needs to, like me, talk to understand what they think and be surrounded by people the whole time, which annoys introvert types.
I remember Jeremy Bourne was saying to me, Jeremy hated speaking in public, but was one of the world's best, one of advertising's best public speakers, but he was always very well prepared. And I think you learn, if you know your topic and you know what you're talking about, generally you can say things that are interesting enough to people.
Did you invest in trying to build out some of the areas that maybe your predecessor was better known for? Or did you come into the job thinking, this is me and I'm just going to do it as me and, I'll get better over time in any case?
Honestly, once I started, I really didn't worry about Martin
enough
at
time
all.
to think
It
about
was
it.
like a total. It would have been a total distraction.
Yeah.
So I just did what I wanted to do. I mean, one of the great things about WPP is it's an amazing company with amazing people and clients and partnerships. And we have relationships, the world's biggest media companies. I was fortunate enough to, interview, Elon Musk in Cannes, or Shonda Rhimes or Jensen Huang, and these people you build relationships with.
Shame you didn't make a podcast out of all of those.
Well, I do. You don't need the competition. No.
It's very generous of you.
But what a privilege to be able to meet and talk to people like that. And I remember you interviewing Elon Musk, and it was, I think, just before he started to be so influential in the world of politics. So how do you approach something like that, and what did you learn from those?
You're trying to get show notes and
Our
tips
PR
from
people
Mark.
told me in no way should I ever do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
They had a complete heart attack. I just thought he's someone that we should listen to.
Yeah.
And I spent a long time preparing. I actually hadn't done that many interviews by that stage. I listened to all of the interviews he'd done. And I spent a bit of time with him over the years. I just kind of asked him the questions I would want to know the answer to be honest. But I was quite well prepared, I would say. I think you have to be well prepared to get good insights out of people.
What was your biggest insight that you took away personally from that?
I think he has a vision that drives actions that people don't necessarily understand. So, why did he put Starlink into space? Not because he wanted to build a set of communications challenges, but because he wanted to build reusable spaceships. So why did he want reusable spaceships? Because he wanted to fly to Mars. Why did he want to go to Mars? Because he wanted to have a second colony for human life so we could prolong existence. So it's kind of interesting, the sort of vision of someone to think, actually, I want to sort of prolong human existence by going to Mars. Oh, and I'm going to build communication satellites. That means when and that is what you get on the West Coast, isn't it? People with big visions,
enormous thinking
about big thinking in big ways that solve both big and small problems.
So going back to kind of Mark, the CEO, you started to digitize communication in COVID and video. But as you said, there's no substitute to showing up, and you had people all around the world. So you have to balance the travel.
Yeah.
And then you also had to set the tone on returning to office, which I know you were sort of at the leading edge of in some ways, a bit controversial. Tell us a bit about how you thought about where to show up, and also how to get people to balance that sort of showing up versus remote.
Yeah, I sort of had this view that if you have people that work for you and they don't see you once a year, they're sending you like a dividend check or a paycheck. Most people a CEO try to see most people once a year. Now, WPP had operations in 100 countries, so clearly that's actually impractical.
Yeah.
But one way or another, you can see them in conferences or events, and people can fly in, and you can do things to try and see most of your senior team in person more than once a year. So that's what I tried to do. COVID, your first thought was COVID was a blessing. Oh my God, I don't have to travel anymore. Yes, I'm stuck at home, but actually we all found out that things work much better than we could ever have imagined. I mean, you and I had conversations at the time, Matt, about, are we going to send people home? And I think we should both be proud of that. Actually, both our companies, we sent people home 10 days, 2 weeks before sort of the official
most countries,
mandate. And I think that helped a lot. Whether things should have gone on in that way as long as, I think, a totally different question. But we learned that we could communicate on video and with people in very different ways. I do think you have to use all of the channels. I mean, very open. I want to be very accessible to the press. I always want to, I try to see all the journalists in person when I can. I think it's much harder for someone to write something rude about you when they've met you. So try and meet them.
I'll write that one down.
Try and meet them. Hiding away. The press don't write things generally because they make them up or they don't like you. They write them because they're news. So being accessible and available will always lead to better coverage than pretending that things are not going to. I remember actually this is a funny story. So my first ever TV interview, I did a bit of sort of media training for this, was CNBC, Andrew Ross Sorkin on the beach in Cannes. And I sort of got my schedule a bit mixed up. I turned up wearing shorts, and kind of polo shirt, no socks. And Chris, our PR person, looked at me, and I didn't know what he was saying. Well, we're going to do this CNBC. Oh, yeah, okay, that's fine. And apparently he thought whether or not he would lend me his trousers or not. decided not to lend me his trousers. So I appeared on CNBC. And when you're in Cannes, it's completely normal to wear shorts, although my view on shorts has changed since that day. So I appear in every like trading, and it's 2:00, which is like peak 7 a.m. trading outlook in New York. There I'm sitting on a beach in Cannes in my shorts. And his first 3 questions were like, with that company in crisis, what's it like? And I'm sitting there in my shorts. Anyway,
That's a formative moment.
it was a very formative moment.
It makes me happy that we're having a closing conversation with a male CEO, can I just say?
Yes, well, that's quite often people ask about that. It's good that your fashion is something that moves markets, I guess.
Yeah.
So look, I think, again, my view on that changed a lot actually over a period of time. I think when COVID first happened, I think I thought we could be much more flexible. But over time, I realized that WPP is a creative company. I think that people thrive off working with each other, and that makes the work better. And I actually felt for middle management and to some extent senior managers who were struggling to get people back into the office that needed them there because they didn't have support from the leadership. I have to say, not all of my executive committee agreed, which made it harder.
What was the mandate you wanted to set?
Well, I wanted people to be in the office at least 3 days a week. But I realized if I said 3 days a week, they'd only be in there 2 days a week. So I said 4 days a week. And then we asked them to be in there, this was because of the property department, at least 2 Fridays so that we could spread people out over the week. So it was a question like the property department put these 2 Fridays in, which I think was the thing that wound most people up. And I had a petition. I think 20,000 people signed the petition. I said to Jamie Dimon once, I got more people signed my petition than signed your petition. I don't think, by the way, all of it, I know for a fact that all of those 20,000 did not work for WPP because there was no method to check. So I have no idea what percentage of our people signed this petition. And I understand why people, to some extent found life easier. But I think that it was the right thing to do for the business. And actually, I think it's the right thing to do for people. I mean, I think at a time when we talk a lot about mental health and people spending time together, I think it's good for people, frankly, to get out and spend time together and be together. I think one thing I miss not being CEO actually is spending all that time I do with people. And so, honestly, maybe people think it's sort of paternalistic to say what's good for other people. I get it. Some people moved a long way away. Some people have childcare, but the policy we had was very flexible. We were perfectly willing. If people want to take their kids to school, I understand. I have kids. If I have to care for a sick parent, I understand that happened. People have sick parents. So I think we did try to be flexible. We wanted to say we want to be a predominantly office-based culture, and that's right. Now, what's interesting is, you have to hand it to David Solomon and Jamie Dimon, who had one policy very quickly and stuck with it. And you look at other organizations, take Facebook. I read Instagram want people in 5 days a week. 4 years ago, they're saying, no one needs to come in ever. It was definitely the right thing to do. It definitely did not make me popular with lots of people. But then you realize being CEO is not a popularity contest.
When you get a petition from 20% of your workforce saying you're wrong, do you sit there and go, oh my God, have a dark night of the soul, I need to reverse the decision? Or do you sort of go, no, I made it for the right decisions and I'm going to stick with it?
Well, you say, of those 20%, probably half of them didn't work for us, at least. So you say it's only 10,000. So you rationalize half of it away like that. And you say, I know that people aren't going to like it, but I still think it's the right thing to do. And it's something that we had to do. Did we handle it perfectly? No. I wish actually, I sent it out in an email at the beginning of the year because it was sort of an efficient way to do it. We should have done a town hall. We should have engaged people. And when actually we did, sort of 6 or 8 weeks later, start to do town halls and I talked to people and we had panel discussions with our leadership about it. It was good. I think too much of it fell on me, and actually our leaders, to some extent, wanted me to do it. And I also thought I wanted to do it because I wanted to take responsibility for the policy, which I knew would not be popular. Could we have handled it better? Of course, you can always handle some things better, but I still think it's the right thing to do. And I think it's the way the world is heading.
You said you had disagreement within your exec team or your leadership team. Did that, gradually converge over time, or did that remain? And how did you handle that?
1 or 2 people left, not connected to it, so that made life easier. And I think some people came around and we weren't totally aligned by the end. But, being the CEO, you're not going to ever get total alignment around every single decision.
No, but when you're implementing a sort of policy where there's significant pushback, it does make a difference when you do have alignment across the top team.
But also I think that there's data to prove both things. We looked at the data. We found actually that offices with higher attendance had higher client satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right? They had higher revenue growth. So it was pretty clear when you looked at the offices where people were coming in more often, they were doing better. You looked at the companies where people weren't coming in so often, they were doing
You
worse.
could be confident as a result.
Now, you can say, is that correlation or causation? I don't know. But I think making people, if people don't want to come into your office to do their job, they don't enjoy their job. In some sense, they shouldn't be doing it. I think people want to, you want people in your company that are really motivated to succeed.
Do you mind if I just build out from there? The question of how leaders can cultivate cultures where creativity thrives in an ever more complicated world, and obviously one where technology is playing an even bigger role than it was when you implemented your return to office policy. What are your views on what levers leaders should be pulling hard on right now?
People are the single most important factor in every business success, and having people who are positive and optimistic. I much prefer optimistic people to pessimistic people. We have this expression about radiators and I can remember it's radiators and sinks or radiators and drains.
Yeah.
But anyway, there are people who, when you spend time with them, you come out with energy.
Yeah.
And then people you spend time with them, you come out with less energy.
We're not going to name names, but we know exactly.
So
who
we
we're
want
thinking about.
people in a business who are going to radiate energy and make things happen. Because I think business ultimately should be a positive force in every respect. I'd say that we are about to go through the biggest transformation of work driven by AI, and there are going to be a lot of people who feel insecure about it naturally, and there's going to be a massive change in work. I think in the short run, it's hard to see exactly where that is and what it is, but I think all of us that use these models can see what the potential is to know quite how far they're going to take things. I think the reality is that only the businesses that embrace them the most will be the most successful. So we have to embrace them, even if collectively it's going to lead to a lot of dislocation.
And so just to underline it, tell us what you think the case is for being optimistic about creativity continuing to thrive in an AI economy.
Machines don't tend to know what a good idea is and a bad idea is. And they tend to answer questions quite literally. So I'll give you my favorite example of this. So we did some work in Australia for an egg company, and they make these free range eggs, and the chickens run around these enormous fields. And the client came to us and said, we'd like to have a poster campaign in Sydney to tell people how happy our chickens are and therefore how good the eggs are. So they went briefly into the creative department, and a young woman in the creative department said, well, we could do a poster. She said, but did you know in Australia you have to print the date the egg was laid on the side of the egg? And what if we could also print the number of steps the chicken took? And so she designed a Fitbit for the back of the chicken, the Fit Chick. And so they strapped this Fitbit on the back of the chicken and it would count how many steps. The first one was shaped like an egg because it would be good for filming. But then the other chickens thought it was stealing the egg from the coop. So they chased the chicken all around. So we would created this thing. We printed like 5,452 steps on the chicken. Now it got a lot of press coverage, a lot of PR coverage. They would have a thing on Strava for how the chicken ran around the field. If you go to AI and ask it for a question, how do I create a poster campaign? It's going back with a very good poster campaign. It's not going to say, actually, the answer to your question is strap the Fitbit on the back of the chicken. So I think there's still a role for creativity in business. And I think AI can speed that process up. It's going to give us more ideas. It's going to give us more options. It's not necessarily going to know what's a good option and what's a bad option. And for that, we're going to need human judgment.
Brilliant. And I've never expected chickens to feature so highly in the answer to that question. Matt,
So
back to you.
We've got a variety of bird life in here today. You set up WPP under your leadership to be about creative transformation. Yes. And with AI accelerating, just as Hayaatun mentions, we don't quite know what that is going to look like. How do you think about creating a culture where creativity can thrive? Because I think that is going to become more important for every company to adapt to this changing world. You're needing to be creative and collaborative and curious. And that's what WPP was all about, despite having lots of different countries, 100 different countries and many different companies. How did you think about creating an environment where creativity can thrive?
Look, there's a theory that smaller businesses are more creative than larger businesses. And it's probably easier to make a smaller business creative than a larger business creative. That's probably true. I think it's about celebrating creativity. It's about having people who are, to some extent, you have to have some people who are responsible for it, but also recognize that it's everybody's job. I was never allowed to have a creative idea myself, but I did have them sometimes. When we won Creative Company of the Year in Cannes, I went on stage with all of those thousands of creatives. I like to think that they thought I was part of the reason that we'd won, because I thought that this was important. So I think it only comes from the top. I was fortunate to have, Rob Riley as a creative partner, and Rob was the type of person, like a magnet for talent. You have to have people around you that are a magnet for talent. And then you have to make to some extent, some irrational decisions. Irrationality in business is often, do I invest in this? Do I hire this person? Do I take a risk? Do I do this? Irrationality is often underestimated. Have you seen the iPhone in China has taken off because there's an Hermes orange version? Now, first thing I looked at that when I saw the orange, it looks like an Hermes iPhone. So clearly, although apparently it's like a slightly different Pantone, it'd be very perceptive to figure it out. So I think that ideas really matter in business, and they're the only thing that differentiates us from the functional.
I want to bring in another animal here, because you alluded to this. I wasn't allowed to have a creative idea, but the highest paid person's opinion, the hippo, I always thought was one of the things that crushes creativity and ideas and innovation. Because if you sit in a room and go, well, hang on a minute, we should do an orange iPhone, everybody else goes, oh yeah, of course we should do that. And the space for ideas to breathe is not there. So are you sort of kind of conscious of that in a leadership role? Or was it because you're an economist that you were not allowing yourself to be creative?
I don't know, maybe in many organizations, the creative person is the highest paid person. So maybe they have the,
okay.
they have
we're learning something about the pay structure at Google here.
Maybe they have that opinion that it matters. I think you have to let people have their wings to some extent, and run with ideas. We did this great event, Stream, as you know, Matt, in WPP, which was sort of with Yossi Vardi. It was an unconference. So it's like Alice in Wonderland. There was no agenda. You didn't know what was going to happen before you went, and everyone thought up ideas and wrote them on a board and talked about discussion. So I think it comes back to a little bit to what we talked about by kind of counter-establishment point of view. I'm quite happy to be in that situation.
So as you step down from WPP, 7 years as CEO, which is, a long stint by anybody's yardstick, what's your reflection on the role of leaders today? We're, talking to people who are aspiring to be leaders and people who are kind of leading large organizations in this really turbulent environment. What's your sense of the challenges that people face, and any advice that you would hand on to the next generation?
Yeah, look, I think it's very easy to say it's harder than ever, right? We can all think of all the reasons that it's harder than ever. Growth is hard to find. Technology is very disruptive. Everything you do is being recorded. You've got podcasts to appear on and YouTube videos to do and speeches to make. People are judging you and can sign petitions very easy. There's lots of reasons to say it's harder than ever. I don't know whether things are ever harder than ever. It's always been difficult for different reasons. I always say to people, choose your job carefully. Often the key to success is job selection. You're going to be in an industry that's got the wind behind it, or the industry with the wind ahead of it. There are some people that love doing turnaround jobs, and there's some people that love doing growth jobs. It's something difficult. So I think that just go into things with your eyes wide open about what you enjoy doing and what needs to get done. And I'd say your first sort of 3 months in the job, you have biggest opportunity to establish yourself and to be successful. That's when you see things the clearest. It's easy to make difficult decisions. People will go along with you. Trust your instincts as much as your analysis. You can do what you need to do, because that's when things are easiest to do.
Because you've got a fresh mandate and a fresh pair of eyes. What makes
you've
that?
Got a fresh mandate. You've got a fresh pair of eyes. Things that you do, the things you do earliest have the greatest chance of being successful over your tenure as CEO. When you're doing things 2, 3, 4 years in, it's always harder to justify them. Or why didn't you do that earlier? I can look back and say there are decisions that I would have made differently, things I would have done earlier. Of course, there have to be, or you're not very reflective as a person. That first period is the time, where you can really have a positive impact on the organization and build momentum.
We've all three stepped down in the last year from jobs, and that's put us in reflective mode.
So we're sitting in podcasts.
That's why we're here. Yeah, because we've got to have a podcast to talk about that stuff. But what's next for you? How are you thinking about the next chapter?
Well, I have thought about doing a podcast. But when I stepped down, I was 58, so I'm sort of, I think, not old, but also not young. And
Experienced.
yes, I sort of
Is
thought,
that
look,
resonating, Matt?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
I thought, look, I'm ready to think about what's there the next 20 years of my life. My father's still working at 90, so
That's a pretty good example.
Time to go. What do I want to do next? And I think trying to recreate the past, never a good idea.
So you won't be starting your own agency to compete with your previous...
I'm not going to compete with WPP, no. So I'd love to do some work closely linked to like a big technology company in the US as a non-executive or advisory role. That's one thing. And do some work in private equity. I've taken on chair of Canton Media. It's a very interesting business. Does TV audience measurement all around the world. And then I like to start to sort of advise some startups in the AI technology area. And I'm doing starting some things there. I'm ready to sort of give advice, to move from sort of execution to advice. People want to take it, they can take it. If they don't have to. I think when you run a public company, and I don't want to sound defensive, but every single thing you do is about making that company successful from the moment you wake up till the moment you go to sleep. Actually, do I fly here for this? Do I make the sacrifice? Do I do this? Do I do that? All of a sudden, I'm in the luxury. Is my algorithm's different? It's not just that. And it was a privilege to do that, but it's actually somewhat different. My kids are 14 and 16. I can spend some more time with them, and I can work with people I want to work with and help them solve interesting problems. I'm also trustee at the Natural History Museum. It's an amazing organization doing a big fundraising drive at the moment. So I'm sort of trying to build sort of a set of things to do that keep me busy, keep me stimulated, keep me connected to young people and technology and things that are going on like the coalface.
So Mark, we're excited to see what you do next in this next chapter. Those all sound amazing, actually quite a lot. We're really hoping you're not going to start a podcast, okay? Don't need any more competition. You've been very generous with your answers. I'm afraid there's one more round to go. But this is the quickfire round.
This is the bit I hate the most.
It's going to be fun.
Hayaatun loves this.
We're going to start in a very easy place. So we're looking for kind of maximum 1 or 2 sentences. What's your go-to snack on a busy day?
Nuts at the moment.
Any particular nuts?
It used to be popcorn and it's been replaced by nuts.
So that's an upgrade. Okay. What's the cleverest campaign you've ever seen? You can make it chicken related if you wish to, not compulsory.
Oh, I still love that old HSBC ad with the eels in China, set in Hong Kong.
Might need to go and look that up. What lesson do you wish you'd learned sooner as a leader?
I think probably take a little bit more risk with my career. It didn't end up badly, but the things I could have done earlier would have been a bit different.
You've done all right so far. What about your most embarrassing moment as a leader?
Probably that CNBC interview. Now I look back on it. But at the time, I thought I'd done brilliantly. What
makes you laugh?
People.
When you're doing your emails and trying to watch TV at the same time, what are you watching?
A lot of, sadly, this is subscriptions to Netflix, Amazon Prime. Well, you go through the list. So a lot of that.
Matt's very sad you didn't say YouTube, but never mind.
YouTube. I'm over YouTube.
Which leader, alive or dead, would you most like to have dinner with?
Nelson Mandela.
What would you like to discuss with Nelson Mandela?
How he stayed so sane for so long and so generous in spirit.
I think that's an amazing note on which to end. My final question for you is, what should we have asked you that we didn't?
I'm not going to give you the answer to that
question.
Oh,
no. Oh, no. We'll just leave in suspense. But thank you. That has been amazing. We've really enjoyed learning from your experience. And we certainly know a lot more now than we did at the start, Matt.
Whether it's beachwear, chickens, or other animals, thank you very much, Mark Reed.
Thanks, both of you. Thanks very much. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
That was interesting, wasn't it, Matt? I mean, you know Mark, so what did you make of that?
Well, I've known him for a really long time, and I've sort of really seen him grow through those stages. So it's fascinating to hear his reflections, particularly about, being in the centre and then being an operator, about that transition to CEO, and then just the intensity of the job of running an enormous public company in 100 countries and what's behind the scenes.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting as well. He sort of almost indicated at the start that he was a bit diffident and talked about being an introvert very early on. But actually he came across as somebody who had a very clear sense of self and actually quite a lot of self-belief, despite what he said when we asked him about that. And I think, that kind of clarity and confidence is part of why people look at you and think you could be a leader. So he did seem to have that sort of, I don't know, he was quite relaxed about decisions he'd taken that had been maybe controversial at the time. He could see the line of thought. He was happy to stand by that, happy to admit where things hadn't been executed the way he, looking back, would have liked to. I thought, that assurance really came across to me.
Yeah, I think for me, what came across, what we know now about Mark is that point of leading by being yourself. He followed somebody completely different personality-wise who totally shaped the company, and he jumps in and he does it his way. And he doesn't try, I don't try at all to ape my predecessor. Everybody knows I have to do it my way. And he is actually really personable and connects well with people at a small level. He mentioned he had to learn how to do the larger scale communication. And then another thing I found interesting was his, insights on running a creative organization, which I think we all need to be. So how do you unlock that creativity and create the space, sometimes by being irrational, to do that and not crush things through leadership? And then finally for me, he shared about how important the early stages of your leadership are. That's the time when you can see clearly, you can take some of the tougher decisions, people aren't sort of second guessing where you're going, and that opportunity to reshape things quickly came across really powerfully. Yeah,
I think those are great points. And I also was really struck by his confidence around why we should be optimistic in an AI era, and this notion that human judgment is not something that's easily automated away. I think there are times when that's going to hold up better than others, but actually I thought that was quite encouraging. I loved his chicken example. I also thought it was some very sage advice around banking that portfolio of experience early in your career. He'd obviously done it without a plan, but really a CEO job is a generalist job. So when you do have within your kind of stable of experience quite a few of the different functions that you might then need to go on to lead, I think it's actually a huge advantage. So you can do it by being, a deep specialist and then broadening out. But I tend to agree with him that it's easiest if you've just had a little bit of an opportunity to see how the different corners of a sector or an organisation work before you have to sit in the top job.
Final thought for me, I think he touched on how difficult it is to prepare to be a leader in today's organizations. You're running a division or a silo, or even at a small scale, a part of an organization. When you step up to leading the whole thing, you've got to know everything. And that's a really difficult thing to prepare for. I'd love to explore that more as we go through this series.
Great, I look forward to that. Great, well, thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much.
See you next time.